The world as a whole is a wonderful place, but while there is a lot of beauty within the world we live in, there are also some places that are infinitely scary in one form or another, even if we don't want to admit it. From ancient parts of history to places that just scream danger, there's a lot to be on the lookout for in case danger decides to come find you instead of you finding it. Now with that in mind, allow us to show you 9 of the scariest finds ever. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Number 9. Screaming mummies. When it comes to how they're made, there's a lot that goes into mummification, and in 1886, a case of improper mummification was discovered. Specifically, archaeologist Gaston Maspero had found a screaming mummy. To be absolutely clear, this wasn't a living person or being, rather the pose and posture of the mummy made it look like it was screaming. This naturally led to much speculation as to how this could happen. The answer was honestly a little more basic than you might think. When we die, our body goes rigid. It's called rigor mortis. However, after a while, when our body relaxes, all muscles in our body go to rest. This is no different with mummies, and because of that, the jaw isn't fastened, which is a practice in proper mummification. It will go slack and the mouth will open. Thus, you have a screaming mummy. Not long after Maspero's discovery in 1886, a series of other screaming mummies were found, showing that this phenomenon was not just rooted in Egyptian mummies. Number 8. Hand Pit. In Egypt, in the late city of Avaris, a group of archaeologists were digging an area around a former palace that had been buried 3,600 years previously. They eventually came upon 4 pits. As they looked inside, they found some bones of hands, lots of them in fact, because it was only hands that were within this pit. How did this come to be? There was once an Asian ruler of Egypt, King Kian of the Hyksos, of whom the palace they were digging up belonged to. And apparently, these hand pits were his doing. For proof of this, 2 of the pits that were found were actually within his throne room. This was a ceremony of sorts, as a soldier would present an enemy to the king, in this case Kian, and would then chop off his right hand in tribute to the king. After all, the right hand was the dominant hand, and taking it would rid the man of his power. Now, this ritual is depicted in many pieces of Egyptian art, and what's more, all the hands in the pits were right hands. A bit overkill when it comes to rituals like these, but the Egyptians take them very seriously. Number 7. Headless Vikings. In Dorset, an archaeological dig was going on near a road. As they continued to dig, they found a massive grave, but as they observed the oddly separated bodies, they found out that these bodies had no heads, and the bones were all separated into groups. After further investigation, it was determined that the people in the mass graves were actually Vikings, and as the team tried to figure out what happened to this group, they realized there were 54 Vikings in the grave. There are 2 prevailing theories as to how this happened. One was they had attacked a village and the villagers survived and then came back to kill them. Now, while plausible, it didn't explain the heads being missing. Furthermore, examination of the spine and neck bones revealed that all of the heads were taken off from the front via a sword that no one can identify. This led to the other theory, one that says that the Vikings were part of a sacrificial ritual, and that their heads were taken due to that while their bodies were carefully buried into the groups mentioned above. Now the only problem with that theory is that the time frame of their deaths didn't have a culture near where they found that had such a ritual. So what could have caused this strange event? Number 6. Incan child sacrifices. Now, pretty scarily, a lot of ancient cultures had beliefs that required sacrificing of children. In terms of the Incans, they had a ritual where they would pick a very beautiful child and then have them go up to the mountains to a burial chamber where they would literally freeze to death. The sacrifice was meant to please their gods, and the sacrifice themselves would be elevated to a high standing in the afterlife. Fast forward to 1999, and an archaeologist named John Reinhard found one of these burial chambers. And when him and his team got inside, there were 3 kids there. Their bodies were perfectly preserved, and if you don't know any better, you would think they were sleeping and not dead. Number 5. The Moa. The year was 1986 and the place was New Zealand. A group of archaeologists went to Mount Owen to examine and observe the underground complex of tunnels that lied beneath the mountain. As they were exploring though, they found a large pile of bones. Naturally, they started to look at them and see what they could find. As they did though, they saw something rather new and fresh. A claw, but not any claw. A claw that seemed to resemble a creature of the ancient past. The freshly decayed claw belonged to an ancient bird called the upland moa. The bird was flightless, but given the size of its claw, was clearly a threat to many. The question remains though, how did this claw get under the mountain? Why was it so perfectly preserved despite other bones not getting the same treatment? Was this proof that the Moa species was somehow still alive? Number 4. Jigsaw bones. In the Scottish Highlands in the early part of the 2000s, a dig was going on under a Bronze Age settlement that existed 3,000 years ago. As they dug deeper, they found 2 skeletons, a male and a female, and both of them were very well preserved despite the location that they were in. But something was off about them, so they took DNA from various bones on both bodies, and to their horror, they found out there weren't 2 bodies there were 6. That's right, someone had taken the bones of 6 different people and placed them in specific order to resemble 2 complete skeletons. Now, why would someone go to such trouble to make these jigsaw mummies, as they are now called? Was this the work of a sick serial killer? A ritual, perhaps? Answers have not been given. Number 3. Tomb of Skulls. In Sweden in 2009, some archaeologists were excavating a dried-up lake bed in Motala. Near the bottom of the lake, they found a sealed structure, which is not something you would expect to find in a lake bed. Within that stone structure was a set of 10 human skulls. Later on, they found an 11th within the mud nearby. These skulls weren't basic by any means. They had things done to them. Many of them were impaled, some of them were burnt to a crisp, and one of them was literally shoved inside another. In fact, the 11th skull I mentioned actually had a piece of skull from one of the 10 within the sealed chamber. And it should be noted that these skulls were alone, no bodies attached to them, though the archaeologists did find evidence that the bodies were impaled and burned before the heads were sealed away. But why go to such lengths? Number 2. Sacred Ridge Massacre. Within Colorado lies a place called Sacred Ridge, and it was home to a Native American tribe. A group of archaeologists were looking over the settlement one day when they realized something rather disturbing, for they had found all the usual aspects of the tribe's culture, but no proof of them. That is, until they realized that the little bits and pieces of things they were finding were within 22 pit homes were actually the mutilated remains of the tribe. According to the archaeologists, 33 members of the tribe had been mutilated and processed into 15,000 tiny bits that could be seen all over the village. Evidence collected suggests that whoever murdered the tribe were also fond of torture, for feet bones showed massive damage to them. And that's not all, for the heads, hands, and other parts of people were taken by the killers. Number 1. Girolamo Sagato. Girolamo Sagato was a man fascinated with the human body, and not in the way that you might expect. He was from Italy and was both a naturalist and a cartographer, and he loved to travel as well. During a trip to Egypt, he was fascinated by the idea of mummies, but he wanted to take it one step further. So he decided to devise a way that could take dead bodies and turn them to stone. Crazy? Not really, because he did it. Repeatedly even. You can actually see some of his works in the Anatomical Museum in the University of Florence in Italy. Though scientists today have been able to deduce part of his process, Sagato made sure no one could replicate it, as he destroyed all of his papers on the chemical process. His tomb read, "Here lies decayed Girolamo Sagato from Belluno, who could have been totally petrified if his art had not died with him." So what do you think? What do you think of this look at the various scary things that have been found in the world today? Can you believe that these things were found in nature at one point or another? Which of these things shown do you think were the scariest of the bunch? Do you know of any other scary finds in nature that should be on this list? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.